Welcome to today's webinar as we celebrate a significant milestone for Argyll. So today we're joined by a special guest and environmental lawyer, Simon Boyle, who's been at the helm of Argyll since its inception 21 years ago now. So Simon, it's fantastic to have you with us. Can you take us back to the beginning? How did Argyll come about 21 years ago?
Yeah, thanks very much, Lauren. As you say, it is a bit of a milestone. It's our 21st birthday today. And so I suppose the first thing to say is time's gone very quickly. And it's really hard to believe it was that long ago that we first started Argyll. And that was actually when we started trading. It was a couple of months before that we were sort of setting everything up. But it kind of came about because I'd worked in industry as an environmental lawyer for about 10 years. And then I joined Groundshaw. And there I met a couple of other people and we had sort of different views about how the company should be run or how reports should be written. We were very much, our thinking was very much writing the very best reports that you could, using the very best data. And so that led to us leaving and starting Argyll. But the crucial thing for that was we needed the best data, and we knew that Landmark had the best data. And so we had a meeting with Stephen Stout, who was chair of Landmark at the time, who agreed. We had a deal in place, and that meant we could start going. So we were very much supported by Landmark right from the beginning.
Great. And going back to kind of the opening and origins of Argyll, I'm sure relationships have been central to Argyll's success. So how did you go about building trust and long-term partnerships with law firm clients in the early days?
Yeah, well, as you say, Lauren, that was the key thing, really. We needed to build strong relationships with the best law firms. We were very fortunate that we had a bit of a flying start because Paul Davis, who was a partner at McFarlane's, who I'd worked with in industry for many years, was helped us set up and said he would support us because he knew that believed in what we were trying to do, which was to write the very, very best environmental reports. So we had Paul's support right from the word go. And then quickly other firms, leading firms, Linklaters and people like that. And so, we were able to build on that. But as you say, with these relationships, which were crucial, it was never about for us going out and making a sale. It was always about building relationships. And two ways that we were able to do that was I worked with UKLA, United Kingdom Environmental Law Association, and also I worked with Brighton University, where we ran a master's course and invited people we knew who were expert in particular fields to come and deliver lectures on those subjects. So that was another way in which we built relationships with sort of key law firms.
And we're talking about 21 years ago now. So what was the environmental risk landscape like back then, and what gap did you see in the market?
Well, it was by today's standards, it was fairly straightforward at the time. You didn't kind of think of it like that. Our focus was on contaminated land, and as an environmental lawyer, the kind of the issues that you tackle with for day to day were sort of contaminated land, permitting issues, water, waste, those sorts of things, which were important and are still important. But obviously now it's far more broader in the kind of all the kind of sustainability work that lawyers are involved in, and of course we at Landmark are involved in it as well. So it was, looking back, it was quite straightforward, and you could fairly. It didn't take too long to get a really detailed understanding of things like the contaminated land regime and those kind of areas. So things have developed a lot since then.
And I'm sure, like every new business, you face some challenges. So what would you say were some of the early challenges you faced in establishing Argyll?
I guess the first one is when you're a new business and you're going out to meet, your potential clients, and some people will naturally be have reservations about putting important business to you, a new company, on the basis you've got no track record. As a company. We may have has as individuals, but not as a company. And they'll be thinking, well, if I buy your reports, but then in 2 years' time you're no longer trading, where does that leave us? We did have very good insurance in place from the word go. I think we had the best insurance in the market, which was helpful. And it is that kind of element of trust and I suppose all I can say was, because we had support from some very top rated individuals and firms from the word go, that helped us establish that. And as time goes by, and of course, you could start maybe with two or three top law firms, but after a couple of months, you might have, you know, 5 or 10, something like that, and then you reach a kind of consensus where people go, oh, well, all the top firms use Argyll, so that's where we should go. And we always kind of focus. We were always about writing the very best reports. They cost a bit more, but of course we use the best data, and they were all handwritten, you know, by consultants. So they took a lot longer to produce than sort of those that are more, you know, computer generated reports.
Yeah, okay, great. And if we now move on to kind of looking at the growth and milestones, what would you say were the key turning points in Argyll's journey over the past 2 decades?
Yeah, really good question, Lauren. The first one was just trading, as you say, getting going, getting some traction, building up a good client base. I think the next big milestone was on doing flood risk reports. And I kind of came across that idea because I wanted to do something that was sort of climate change related. And it was quite hard to think how we were going to do that, where you were sort of building reports. And obviously, there's the link between flood risk and climate change. Now, these weren't looking to the future in terms of climate change reports that do now. But nonetheless, you know, we knew that through climate change, flooding was going to get worse, and therefore we thought a flood report would be a good thing to bring into the market. And so we were the first data provider to do that. So that was one milestone, I guess, and that was around 2007. The next one, a few years then going forward, would be doing our risk horizon report, and that was very much initiated again by Paul Davis, who'd been doing a lot of ESG work. I think is regarded as really the world's top ESG lawyer. So Paul thought that would be a good opportunity for us to sort of embrace, which we did, and so we took over the risk horizon software, and then, you know, built our own expertise on that. That, I think, was a major milestone, because the work that we'd done, you know, hitherto had been UK based, and now we were doing, you know, reports on a global scale. So we're looking right across the world at these key risks. And then I suppose since then, it's really been getting ourselves into the field of sustainability with our, you know, our climate change reports, and more recently, you know, on biodiversity. So I think we've come a long way.
Great. And so Argyll, well, my understanding is Argyll was the first to offer consultant-led assessments for both contaminated land and flood risk. So how did that innovation come about?
Well, I think that was really, we were looking at sort of new arising risks. I mean, contaminated land was a really interesting field and technical, but, you know, we wanted to do further than that. And so we were sort of thinking, well, where's a good area to go? And because I was interested in climate change and could see the links between climate change and flood risk, that's where I thought, well, flood risk is something that's going to become more prevalent in the UK going forwards. It's, you know, was a risk at 2007, but I could see it developing into a bigger risk, and that seemed to be a good area to be looking at. And so, you know, we did some research, and then, you know, built our flood report, you know, which we combined with contaminated land, and then ultimately that led to the Law Society practice note on flood risk being introduced. So obviously, then it's become sort of, a standard report that lawyers commission.
And following on from that a little bit, Argyll's known for its manual sort of consultant-led approach. So why was it important to maintain that level of quality and personalisation in your reports?
Well, when we've asked clients about kind of why they like to use Argyll, the reason that's usually given is they like the fact that a report is written by a person, an expert person, a consultant, and that consultant is always there at the end of the phone. So if there's any queries at all, you've got the name of the consultant on your report, and you can ring up and say, "Can I speak to whoever wrote it?" and then have a meaningful conversation, get the information you like. And that's always been central to us, that there's ownership essentially between the consultant and the report that's going out, and, you know, a human understanding of what they're writing. And the other approach, of course, it's computer generated. Now, of course, we are using AI and other techniques to sort of help with those now. But at the end of the day, they're only tools. Each report is still written by a consultant who's signing off to that, and I think that's very important. I mean, these are people are making major investments in these properties, whether it's for residential, if somebody's buying a house, or a business is buying a commercial property. They're very important. Lots of money is being transacted, and it's important to get the information right. Computer generated reports do a reasonable job, but they're never going to be as good as an expert person looking at the data. And as I say, who's also there at the end of the phone to answer any questions.
And would you say that this has helped shape the way environmental risk is understood and managed in commercial property transactions?
Well, I think so, because at the end of the day, you need people who really understand those risks. And the fact that we have, a fairly large body of consultants based in our Brighton office who understand those risks and communicate with each other. And there's always discussions when you're in the office. There'll always be a discussion about consultants about, well, I've got this report and this is what we're looking at. What's your assessment of the risk? So there's dialogue. And if you don't have that dialogue, there's not a meaningful understanding really about about those risks and how you deal with them. So I think it's essential that we always work in that way, with contaminated land. But as we, broaden out, looking at sustainability risks, they're very complex and interconnected. So when we look at climate change risks, we also got to look at the biodiversity dimensions there, or the net zero dimensions. And so you need people who understand those, at a very comprehensive level. So I think that the fact we've gone to this more kind of complex world makes it even more important that you have that level of expertise. Computers can do a certain amount, but I think most people will want experts to interpret that data for them.
Mm-hmm. And you talk there about the complex environmental issues. So what role do you think Argyll has played in supporting lawyers, but also non-experts, in navigating these complex environmental issues?
Well, I guess what we've always tried to do is take the very best data that we can find. But if you just give people data, for most people, it's very hard to make much of that. So it's about taking data and providing an assessment of that data and putting it into as clear language as you can. And I think where we've sort of moved a bit over the years, we used to have a lot of kind of handwriting about things, about, say, a property and where it was based and what was going on outside that. And it was all sort of handwritten. Now we're trying to sort of simplify that process and just kind of focus on the key aspects. But we're also presenting that risks in images, say in our flood reports, and even using colours, as we do with ESG, to highlight the risks, from sort of red worst to green best. So it's how you present really quite complex data in a way that people can quite readily understand, and not having to spend hours and hours reading something, so they can perhaps within 2 or 3 minutes get an overview of what's going on. And then, of course, we in a report, there's a lot more kind of, you've got your front page which sets out the basics, and you've got all the kind of detail behind that. But if somebody, and solicitors and lawyers usually are, time pressured, want to very quickly get a handle on what the main risks are, then that's what we try to do.
Yeah, and it sounds like you've done some really great work over the 21 years. So if we start to look ahead now and look at the future of Argyll, what excites you most about the future?
Well, I think we are in a very interesting time in all respects, really. As we know, the world is complex, the world is ever changing. And for us to be able to assess risks kind of rapidly is going to be a big challenge. So we need to be very smart. We need to properly understand these risks. So we need absolutely top rate consultants who really immerse themselves in their subjects. And I think one of the things we're going to see is, whereas in the past we've tended to kind of look at things in silos. So you'd kind of, well, what's your contaminated land risk for this property? What is your flood risk? What is whatever else that risk might be? I think increasingly we'll have to be taking a more of a systems interconnected view of how things go, because things don't work in isolation. Everything interconnects, and it's understanding those interconnections and presenting a holistic view of those risks, especially in the world of sustainability. Because, as I was saying, you can't just look at climate change in isolation. Climate change and biodiversity are, in a sense, two sides of the same coin. So you need to understand how these things work as systems.
And if we look at the sort of future of environmental risk, how do you see this evolving in the next 5 to 10 years, and how is Argyll preparing for that?
Well, risks are always going to be there. Some risks are new and emerging that we haven't had to look at before, and I suppose that the classic case is going to be in climate change, because we haven't had to worry about those sorts of risks in the past, and now they're very much emerging risks. We're already seeing that being felt, and very much so, the climate effects of climate change in other parts of the world, less so in the UK. But I think we will increasingly, and it's sad, have to face that. So things like water stress, we've not had to worry about water stress really in this country. We've always had plenty of water. Other countries not so, but it's looking as if we will do going forward. So we have to start understanding how things are going to be moving forwards and how people deal with that. I mean, there are always risks. At the end of the day, all we can do is present those risks. We can't say to somebody whether you should buy this property or not. We can just kind of surface those risks, explain those risks as best we can. And at the end of the day, the client has to take a view on what to do. So I think things are going to evolve very fast over the next few years. We need to be very focused, very ahead of the game on these things. It's very challenging, but I think what we have a really first-rate team of consultants, but also there are about 10 of us who specialize within the sustainability team. And we have and are building up a lot of expertise in that area. So, for example, we have an expert on net zero, which is obviously a major issue for this country. And at the end of the day, we're also very fortunate to have Professor Bob Lee, who chairs our Landmark Academy. And Bob is a really good person to take any kind of issues that we're going to and having a discussion with him. And he always gives us extremely good advice.
So, what would you say your vision for Argyll's role in supporting sustainable development and climate resilience is?
Yeah, well, thanks, Lauren. I think that's an excellent question, because I very much hope that we at Argyll can play an important role here, because we all know that we have to have a sustainable world going forward. That there's no unsustainable world is not something that we can live in. So we have to live in a sustainable way, and we haven't been doing that in the past. We know that the stresses that we're placed on the planet, these so-called planetary boundaries, are being exceeded in many areas, such as on biodiversity and climate change. So we have no option. We have to live in a sustainable way. But that's easier said than done. But without data, it can't be achieved, because you don't know if you're doing something, whether it's going the right direction or the wrong direction. So we need really good data, and good data needs people who can understand that data at a really good level and looking at it very objectively. And so that's our role, I think, going forward. So I do think that Argyll can play and will play an important role in the sustainability journey going forwards. And I think increasingly we'll become a kind of global organisation, so that we'll have most of our consultants in the Brighton office have a first degree in geography and then masters usually in a related field. And I think they'll be really using their skills as geographers, looking at these risks globally and assessing them, and how we show those, and also looking at solutions. We also all the time be thinking about adaptation and mitigation and climate change. I think we're trying to read as much as we can on what's going on, and forming views ourselves or the best way forward. I mean, for example, something that I've been doing since we formed Argyll is on the rights of nature. And that's something we've been doing over 20 years with UKLA as a new way of looking at sort of how we develop our relationship with nature, where basically it would give far more legal protection to the natural world.
Great. And just some personal reflections now. What would you say you are most proud of when you look back at Argyll's journey?
Well, I think, I mean, a lot of it is I feel like I've been very lucky. And I feel that because of the wonderful people I've met along the journey, really, I've got to where I've got to because of them. And I've had so much help by so many people over the years, and I can't believe how lucky I've been, really. So I think it's been very much a team effort. I've been really fortunate to have been able to play a role within that. But I hope ultimately we're a force for good, because we do have these challenges, huge challenges that we have to work through, as not just in this country but globally. We need great leadership, of course, which is not always there. In some places it is, and others it doesn't seem to be there. But I think we can provide the data, and we can provide a really good understanding of that data so people can make intelligent decisions. And we can sort of, I think, help point people in the right direction where certain things are. I mean, I guess what I'm most proud of, mainly, I suppose, I think we always have taken this view about nature needs a lot more protection. And when you look at the figures coming up, reports like A State of Nature is just totally unacceptable that we have decimated our natural world to the extent that we have. And I think we at Argyll, we have very much done that, as I say, with this sort of with rights of nature, and seeing that as a way forward for the law to develop, which is fairly radical, I suppose, but more people are picking up on that. But we've been doing that with Brighton University since 2005, when we ran the first wild law event.
And so, finally, Simon, are there any new developments on the horizon that you can share with us?
Well, there are, Laura, in action. It's very exciting. We have, in the process of relaunching all of our reports. I could best describe those, I guess, as sort of they're digital reports, and they're going to allow a lot more choice for people in terms of how their data is provided to them. So if you decide there's one data set you don't want, then that don't have to take that, but there can be something else you do want. You can include that there. So these are kind of essentially remastered reports. They're going to be redesigned. They're really clear, very concise language being used. So basically, it's been a spring clean of all of our reports, and a freshening up of those, but basically on new digital platforms. And we've been working very much with those right through the journey with our what we call the Argyll advisors, and there are about 20 or so top lawyers, environmental lawyers, and property lawyers from across the main firms, who very, very kindly give their time and sit down with us and kind of go through what the ideas are. So it's very much sort of industry-led, and getting informed and to a degree directed by these people, these experts, who will tell us kind of how they want their reports to look. So we think we've got something which will be really the best environmental reports that have ever been produced.
Well, that sounds very exciting. So, thank you so much, Simon. It's been really, really great to hear about Argyll's beginnings and the impact you've had and will continue to have on the industry.
Thanks very much indeed, Lauren.